consumed a lot of narratives in the past few weeks that have inspired my writing in some way. Books, movies, TV shows, even music. Here they are in descending order of their impact, including specific lessons that I learned from each of them. And fair warning, for each of these, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen or read it yet, just something to be aware of. Number 8. Only Murders in the Building. I love how this TV show is about a true crime podcast. I love that narrative frame. I love that it brings together such distinct characters and that those characters sometimes break the fourth wall. It adds humor and it makes the audience feel like they're part of the investigation, which is so fun, especially for a true crime podcast. Other aspects I loved, the red herrings throughout do a great job of keeping you guessing and keeping your attention engaged. And the many guest appearances throughout are also really great. Tina Fey, Paul Rudd, Meryl Streep, Cara Delevingne, Amy Ryan, Jane Lynch. And I love that they aren't afraid to give those guests major roles, sometimes even villainous roles. I think usually when there's a big name that's guest starring, they tend not to be major characters or villainous characters. Number 7 is another TV show, Shrinking. Shrinking does such a great job of showing how you can incorporate humor in a narrative that's otherwise about really serious topics. It also does such a great job of humanizing characters and showing their raw, visceral reactions to really difficult things that happen in their lives. I also love how it highlights the importance of found family. All the characters are so distinct, once again, and they sometimes have conflicting emotions, particularly in this show, but they fit together really well. Number 6. Verbathim, an album by one of my favorite new artists, Nemesis. And she says the title is like saying verbatim, but with your tongue being held, which I think is so cool. Nemesis was one of my top Spotify artists this year. We won't talk about any of my other artists, not today at least. But I love Nemesis. I love that she's so political, so original, and so wholly herself. The sparse instrumentation throughout this album highlights raw emotion. It is her debut album, so I'm so excited for what's to come. And I love how often her music is accompanied by vivid, narrative-driven visuals. I love that interplay of text and subtext. I think she'd be such a fascinating person to interview, and I did slide into her Instagram DMs to try to get her to let me interview her. So far, she has not responded. Number 5. Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. Cheating a bit here by mentioning 3 and 1, and each of them are really powerhouses in their own right. The second and third movies in particular are really, really great. I think I like rom-coms the most, but superhero films are a close second. I love superhero movies because they force me to reckon with the fact that not all narratives have to make sense. At least not like the full way, all the way throughout the narrative. The audience is willing to suspend disbelief at times. And in general, you can kind of get away with that because you're featuring superhuman people and superhuman narratives. This is particularly the case when a lack of sense makes for a better narrative overall. People don't necessarily want a superhero movie to make sense. They don't necessarily want to wonder how someone who is bankrupt and just climbed out of a prison in the desert is able to get home, fly back to Gotham City within a matter of hours without any money or identification or anything on him. Number 4. Umbilical Discord, a poetry collection by Rawan Mustafa, the 2024 winner of the Ethel Adnan Poetry Prize from the University of Arkansas Press. What I love about this collection is that it shows me how to write a full collection comprised of just one poetic form, specifically contrapuntals, which I consider to be one of the more difficult poetic forms. If you're unfamiliar with what a contrapuntal is, the poets.org definition: contrapuntal is a poetic form that interweaves 2 or more poems to create a single poem that can be read in multiple ways, depending on how the poem is designed on the page. So I love that this book is practically 3 books in one. And I'm also really looking forward to interviewing Rowan. She's my next featured guest on Tightwires. Number 3, Wicked. I've been an Alphabet fan ever since I saw a bootleg recording of Wicked in high school. I wanted so badly to be the Wicked Witch during my school's production of The Wizard of Oz my senior year. But they gave me Elmira Gulch, who is like the human equivalent of the Wicked Witch. It's fine. I'm not still salty. But I was so excited to see the big screen adaptation of Wicked, and it did not disappoint. In particular, and this is a huge spoiler for the musical, so fair warning. But I loved the final scene. I loved how she saw and addressed her inner child in that scene. It was such a powerful and striking moment that left the audience in shambles. Or I don't know if the whole audience was in shambles. I was in shambles. I literally can't think of any other narrative that's managed to address the inner child, not in recent memory at least. I feel like most of the time it's kind of just like assumed throughout that the character is grappling with what happened to them as a child, but it's never explored so explicitly, especially when it comes to like musical theater. I feel like it's a difficult thing to attempt, but Wicked manages to do it so beautifully. Even though I made it number 3 on this list, it's probably the one that moved me the most. Number 2, The Truman Show. I just watched this for the first time very recently. I know I'm super late. I hear it referenced all the time, and I've always been told that it's probably a movie that I would like, and I did end up really enjoying it. I think I've always been really into meta narratives, TV shows or films about the TV and film genres, particularly when those narratives address existential questions about free will and authenticity. I think this movie is doing a lot of interesting things with perspective in particular. It's a really cool construction where the protagonist is the only one unaware of the larger stakes. I think it's really cool that we get to see the narrative from his oblivious perspective, but then also the external orchestrator's manipulation from the very beginning. But then the narrative still finds a way to surprise us when it reveals the truth to him. Finally, my number 1, the narrative that had the most impact on me in the past few weeks, Big Magic: Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert. This was a last-minute addition to this list, honestly, but it ended up being number 1 in terms of impact. I wasn't very familiar with Elizabeth Gilbert before I read this book. I had seen and enjoyed her TED Talk, but I've never read any of her work, even though various people have recommended this book to me numerous times in the past. Honestly, I spent the first 25% of it feeling a bit skeptical because so much of it feels so strange. She's basically anthropomorphizing the very process of writing and of creativity, which sounds very out there, but ultimately I found it very endearing and very inspiring. I can already see that it's having a major impact on my creative process. I love in particular the emphasis on writing for writing's sake, which I came to realize has never been my viewpoint. From even my earliest recollection of writing, it's always been the means to an end. It was always about either receiving praise from the people in my life or getting published, which is another sort of praise. But writing has always been there for me, time and time again. I think in 2025, I want to honor the practice for what it's done for me by treating it as less of a means to an end and more of a joy in and of itself. I do have more thoughts on this book. I highlighted a lot, and I'll share some of my favorite quotes in a future video. But that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about the narratives I've shared, if any of them have ever inspired your creative process. I'd also love to hear what narratives have inspired you recently and what you gained from them. I'll see you next week.